Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. I wanted this video to be longer, but it's my birthday tomorrow on the 17th, so I decided to take a bit of a rest from working today and have tomorrow off. I was gonna say, just enjoy good times that you have with people, because you really don't know how many you're gonna have, and I always struggle to enjoy things I do or appreciate them, because for some reason I don't really see a point in a lot of the things that are celebrated, but I've realised more in time that you really need to appreciate them, because you don't know how many you're going to have, and every day that goes by you get older really, and the future isn't guaranteed, so enjoy the things that you do have and enjoy, it's really important. But I hope you're all doing great. I love you and enjoy these stories. And make sure you check out the podcast in the description and my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac. I'm a child of the mountains and my hometown was completely mountainous, so I spent most of my childhood running through the forests and stuff, and one event that happened when I was 10 remains unexplained. I was on top of the ridge several hundreds of feet above my house when I started hearing my biological father yelling. In a very redneck area, he had a very distinct voice with no accent, so it's not really possible to confuse him for anyone else. His voice was coming from the other side of the ridge, which is a bit weird in retrospect because nobody over that way actually lived in that area and everyone avoided everyone in there. Even when hunting, we'd go around, the train was worse to deal with, but it's what we done. He starts calling my name, so I go down there. But the voice isn't getting any closer. I start feeling dread washing over me, and I suddenly remember my father's on a trip to Germany. I've never ran so fast. I didn't realise it until I got to the other side of the ridge, but the forest had been completely silent on the other side of the ridge, which never happens unless there's predators or the wind picks up. Normally, I'd think I was just getting closer to black bear territory, but the voice obviously makes it confusing. Unlike a number of stories like this I've heard over the years, the experience didn't really stop me from going into the woods. It just made me more curious. I've never had an explanation for it since, and it kind of worries me. The closest thing I've heard it could be is like a skinwalker, but I'm not sure. It may even be a person who is trying to stalk me in, but I guess I'll never know. Hey everyone. About 2 weeks ago, I had a really scary experience and my husband didn't believe me, but last night, he had a very similar experience and now we're both wondering what we could have possibly seen. So our puppy was barking to go outside and use the bathroom. It's about 4 or 5 AM. I took him out and stood on the steps of our deck because I didn't want to get my feet wet. My dog was using the bathroom when I looked up and I see something across the yard. It was slowly walking towards me, one step at a time. Its eyes were super reflective. I thought it was a deer, but its eyes were so tall and staring at me, and it wasn't running away. I hurried the dog up and we ran inside. I have reoccurring night terrors, so at first, my husband thinks it's just that, but I was crying and shaking and could barely be spoken to. He tells me it's probably a deer, but I wasn't convinced, and I refused to take the dog out after midnight again. As for my husband's experience, it was early in the morning, about 5 AM. The dog was barking and he took him outside. Once again, my husband stood on the deck outside. He didn't have his glasses, but when he looks up, he saw something tall standing in the forest near our backyard. He said he saw it walking slowly, almost gliding. He said that the moment he made eye contact, his nose was bleeding. My husband is typically not prone to them either. He said he wanted to get a closer look but felt the need to go inside, almost like an instinct. My husband's a zookeeper, He's not really afraid of animals and can recognize many of them. I still have no idea what this is. We live in Eastern PA. This happened around the 1900s in the countryside of South Brazil. My grandmother's grandfather was coming home from a ball very late at night. He lived in a small farm, and so to come from the party place he had a long way to walk in the middle of nothing, with just trees and bushes. And well, you can imagine how the countryside of Brazil was, especially back then. He said that while he was walking, all of a sudden, he heard strange noises and lights. Scared, he hid in the bushes to see what was happening. He said there were very little men speaking in a foreign language. Behind him, there was two huge plates stacked on top of another, with lights all over them. He stayed hiding and praying until they left and ran for his life. My grandmother says that she's heard this story a few times in her youth from him, and the narrative always stayed the same, with him praying after. Only after she married and moved to the big city and had children did she start to hear about these things being known as aliens and other things. Her grandfather at the time would have had no concept of aliens. After a heavy night of drinking and camping, we woke up and nobody wanted to make breakfast, so we decided to drive into town and find a diner. We're approaching where the dirt meets the pavement and come up on dozens of sheriffs backloading the road, two of which have rifles pointed towards us. We stop the truck about 40 feet from them and hear them yell over the intercom to stick our hands up now. They then instruct us to approach on foot with our hands in the air. They search my truck and find it full of loaded guns and beer. That's when they tell us that a Forest Service agent had been shot and killed nearby, and eventually let us go, but tell us our camping gear is out of bounds until the murderer is found. We didn't want to leave our camping gear and go home, so we ended up at a nearby casino, continuing partying there. A few hours later, someone in the casino says there's loads of cops outside. We go outside and there must have been 100 sheriffs, local PD everywhere. Apparently, that same murderer had stopped at the casino gas station and an officer recognized him. Then LEO drew his gun, murderer went for his and the LEO shot him dead. We went back to the camp and home the next day. I checked the newspaper articles and they made a map of where the murder happened, and it's only 200 yards away from our campsite. I have a friend who's a trail ranger. He's basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking them down and whatnot. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back, but it's a 1-hour ATV ride. My friend finished up the last one when he hears voices. He kept in mind that he's far off the beaten path. He calls out and no one replies. As it was getting dark, he starts to head back and found his ATV won't start. He then realizes that the batteries are not connected. He reconnects it and started to drive but isn't going fast. Less than half a mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back saying, "Hey guys, someone pick me up." They said they would do it but are gonna take an hour. He said, "Can the other guy come back?" and he said no. So he settled down, made a small fire, but heard voices again. It's dark and he's angry. The voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry, yelling at someone else who sounded scared. He called out and said, "Does anyone need help?" The voices don't care. He thinks they're less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they're having trouble finding what path he'd be on. and haven't left yet. He said to them just to get another ranger there. About 3 minutes go by and the voices start again. He decides to walk there, hoping maybe there's some drunk people that have a map. He walks in their direction, but the voices seem to be getting further away as he got closer. Finally, 20 minutes later, he gave up and walks back. He got a radio call, and they said the other guy was passed out, covered in vomit, and was taken to hospital. They don't know exactly where I come from still, because he crossed off everywhere that he went. Then the radio died, and the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decides to listen to what they're arguing about, and picks up on things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take, and I knew you were gonna do this, you idiot, and I don't care." His guess is that 2 hunters are arguing over a kill. Then he heard something intelligible. Then silence. Bang. A gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that he heard nothing. Just his breathing for the next half hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours but found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and a man who'd been shot in the head was also found. Thing was, it was a skeleton who had been there for years. So either the argument he heard was somehow from the past, or someone else got murdered recently when he was there. This happened while I was doing my army service in Switzerland. I'm not allowed to talk about exactly what we were doing there, but I'll try and keep this clear. My company has installed a huge antenna, and it has to be guarded day and night. So we're on a hill, away from a city near a massive forest. It's 1800 hours, and I had just started my watch of 6 hours with another soldier. Everything's fine. We smoke cigarettes and keep ourselves occupied until our night watch ends. Then, we receive a call from our superior who said that one of the soldiers that's supposed to watch hasn't come out, and we have to stay for another 6 hours. So we tossed a coin to see who's going to stay from midnight till 6 AM with temperatures of -20. And of course I lost. And I had to wait for the other soldiers to come and join me for the rest of the night. They sent Jon Snow. No, I'm just kidding. They've only sent another soldier, but not the best, because I knew he would sleep all night when I saw him climbing the hill with his sleeping bag. And that's what he did. He immediately took place in the tent and fell asleep. It was the coldest and longest night of my life. Nothing special about it. The weirdest part though happened in the morning. We received another call from our superior telling us that we had an NBC exercise. It means that we have to wear all-day chemical suits. The one with the gas mask and everything. I was really upset and exhausted because I wasn't able to sleep with that thing on, and sleep was my only reward for the 12-hour watch. Well, I get out of this tent, and I saw this thing that still scares me to this day. I see a woman standing next to the antenna. She wasn't moving, she was just standing there, meters from my tent. I couldn't see her face because of the sun starting to rise behind her. I knew she's a woman because she had really long hair. Remember that we're in the middle of nowhere and she's standing there, not moving, like she's frozen. I start to freak out and call the other guy to see what I'm looking at. I don't know why, but he wasn't scared at all, and he told her to leave. But she didn't. She just stood there staring at us. I was confused. How could a woman ignore 2 soldiers in a forbidden area? I mean, we're in Switzerland. The army's not that impressive, I know, but people usually don't do this kind of thing. They would just move away, especially when it's 6 in the morning. And what she's doing in the middle of nowhere is beyond me, not dressed for cold climate. How long was she there? And how did she get there? I don't even see any footsteps. So, there's so many questions running through my head. The other soldier didn't think twice and starts walking towards her. When he almost reaches her, she starts running very fast into the forest. I see her going deep into the forest and I never see her again. I'm a really rational thinker, but I have absolutely no explanation for this. Thank God there was someone there with me, because nobody would have believed me if it was just me there at that time. My father told me a story many times when I was growing up of something that happened to him. I know he believes it to be true, and he's not a very superstitious person whatsoever. Very analytical on the other hand. My dad was 5 years old, camping with the Boy Scout troop. They sent everyone for firewood. It was dusk, so he went off on his own and a little further than the other kids. He wanted to gather more firewood than anyone else. He got far enough away that nobody else had picked through the fallen wood and started gathering. Along his way, he went until he almost stepped on a tiny tribe of Indians, moving around a fire, dancing. He said they were tiny, and they didn't pay him any attention as he crouched down to look at them. He ran over to go and tell his friends, but by the time he come back, they're all gone. He said he's never seen anything like it in his life, and he was sure someone was playing a prank on him, but how? How could somebody make a prank look that real? I live near a very large, very popular national park. Locals here, like myself, are pretty aware of the goings on here. Strange sounds, weird creatures, and strange disappearances. I've dealt with these in my past times and hikes, and even just relaxing in the park. Here's one that still freaks me out to this day. I was at my grandma's house that's deep in the Bonnies, and the only road there is a gravel road that's washed away. Without a good car, you're not getting anywhere. My cousins lived in a trailer with their mums, right below my grandma's. We played all sorts of games, which mainly involved me getting chased, being the youngest. My grandma was in hospital with my aunt, so our oldest cousin, who I'll call Dee, had to watch us. Dee was, and still is, the only cousin that's older than us that we still hold in high regards. He would mess with us and play around, but actually cared about us. The whole day we were playing around, but we would usually play more at night, like hide and seek, etc. We'd been playing pretty far away from the house and it was starting to get dark. We decided to go back to the house and grab flashlights and play manhunt. Of course, I was the one being hunted. So I ran pretty far into the woods on the other side of the property, hiding behind a log. I heard my cousins getting closer, so I ran and they saw me. We ended up running to the very back of the property line, and we saw my cousin D. He looked at us and kinda growled. We all ran from him, thinking it's a game. We ran back to the gravel road when we saw him walk out of the tree line, but he did in a weird way, gloatingly in fact. We ran into the house and decided to barricade the door to play a prank on him. We moved a couple of things in front of the door, but decided to move the big coffee table in front of it too. As we loudly scooted the table, they come into the living room from the bedroom. We had obviously woke him up, and we said we saw him chasing us, and he got wide-eyed. He said stay in the bedroom. We sat in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, and he come in and told us not to worry, that he's just scaring us. It wasn't until 4 years later, when I was 13, he told me the truth. He's pretty certain that it was a skinwalker. He told me he's dealt with it before and was terrified it hunted us, and he was too scared to tell me at the time because I'd get worried. So with a few fraternity brothers and I are backpacking in the Nafala National Park and met some guys. They're locals. I mean, not local hangout bros, but local backwoods people who lived there for generations, hate the government and society types. These are guys that have apparently been helping Eric Rudolph, the Olympic bomber, hide in the national forest by supplying him with food drops. Really weird drunken conversations. They actually took us to one of the hideout drop-off caves. They were too serious, and that's the whole reason that I hated this. They trusted us because some things were said to make them think we're of a similar mindset. Anyway, we parted ways. Spent a few days trying to figure out if it is all lies or not. And that same week, they call Eric Rudolph in the dumpster of a Piggy Wiggly 3 miles from where we met the guys. Every single thing these guys said matched up with the news story. We gave them the bottle of Jack even. They said they'd give it to Eric. Creepy as hell. Hauntingly terrifying in retrospect. So when I was about 5 years old, I was at my sister's graduation party. My father had rented out a pavilion at a heavy wooded area of Country Park. I ended up following some kids throughout the forest, and after a while, I realised I wandered too far from the pavilion and started heading back. I remember not being able to find my way back and ended up being lost for around an hour. As I was walking, a man dressed in white from head to toe appeared to me. He said his name was John. I explained to him that I was lost and told him where my family was. I remember him accompanying me throughout the woods, and he had a very comforting presence about him. After a while, I remembered hearing my uncles calling for me from a distance. I turned to tell John that that's my uncle, but he was gone. I turned the other way, and there was my uncle. I'm 30 now, but can't help wonder exactly what John was and what the meaning of all of this was. I guess I'll write what happened in chronological order. To preface this, I should mention that all of this took place back on my reservation. I'm from Algonquin First Nation from Canada. Another thing I should mention is that on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of our life. We believe in a spirit world, and we believe that sometimes these beings can cross over from their world to ours. Well, I tell paranormal stories to my non-native friends. They're always in disbelief of what I tell them, but they've had no paranormal experiences, unlike me having a bunch. And most everyone I know on the res has had one. I don't really care to explain it, but it is what it is. Anyway, here's the story. This happened in the fall of 2011 when I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mum, so I can get a better education than the one I can get at home. But we'd go back every single week to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night, and she said to me when am I going to be home so they can pick me up. I gave her a time and that was that. When we got home, as soon as we stepped inside the house, I see my dad and cousins sitting at the kitchen table drinking. They're both cops on the res, so usually beers with his partner on a Friday evening happens. Means that they had a particularly tough week at work though. Typically, the toughest cases they deal with are ones around children. So a part of me felt sad immediately that something bad's happened. They both look tired and drained, but they're happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a little, and my dad asked me if I have any plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousin share a weird look. "Why are you guys making that face? Did something happen?" I say. "I dunno, should we tell her?" my cousin said, looking at my dad. He laughed and said, "Yeah, we probably should, because I'm gonna have to be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening." They start off by saying the first strange call they get is on a Monday night. There's an elderly woman saying that there's people outside of her home knocking on all of her windows. She can't see anyone, but there must have been at least 3 people, judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrive at the woman's home, inspect all around the house, even the woods, but find nothing. They tell her that it's probably some teenagers playing tricks on her, but sadly there's nothing they can do really, besides patrol the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had been raining that day too, and there was mud everywhere, so they figure at least they're gonna know where they went. But they don't find a thing. This is when they start feeling like something is off, because one of the windows where the woman was, she's adamant that there was someone there, but it's completely impossible to get there without going through a huge puddle. This is when they start to think she's lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her friend a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out that she wasn't the only one experiencing it. She was just the one to call. I mean, all of this is taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to the supernatural. My dad still wasn't sure if it's just a group of teens playing a prank on people, but they get another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rush over there, but are met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbour walked over looking pale as a ghost. That's saying something for him. He says, "Is this about the knock-in?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah. Did you see something?" they ask him, and he nods and said, "You guys are gonna think I'm crazy, but yeah." And he goes on to explain what he saw. He said he stepped out for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it's coming from, and when he looked to his neighbour's house, he saw it. There's a black figure standing outside of the woman's window. The same one with the puddle, looking at her home. He said it looked humanoid in stature, but completely made out of a shadow. You could tell it was something solid-ish, but you cannot make out any features on it. He stared at it completely in shock, and watched that thing as it knocked a couple of times, then darted around the house knocking on every window, moving so quick it's like a blur, and it went around the house a few times. The man ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen but couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light similar to a cat's, and then it smiled, showing its small but numerous pointed sharp teeth. "I almost had a heart attack," he said while it happened. Fast forward to Friday. Stories are being exchanged all over the res about sightings and experiences people are having. On top of that, multiple people are experiencing the knock-in. There's also quite a few sightings with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash to the side of the road, and she thought she saw the woman somewhere in her peripheral vision standing near the trees. She walks back up the driveway and into her home, feeling as though she's being watched. Right before she's about to open her door to go back inside to her home, she looked back and saw 2 reflective yellow eyes staring at her from the trees, saying it's about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving at night and said they saw a humanoid figure too. "You sure you still want to go to that party?" my dad asked. But my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye, and they told me to be careful, but I felt fine. A common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy. Therefore, an evil spirit will draw to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who's spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, you're pretty good. So I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards the paranormal experiences everyone's having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories that I haven't heard yet, but my friend, being 17 and all, couldn't hold her alcohol very well, and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I'm trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone else's stories. One of the people from the party was related to the neighbour of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that was going on. For one, he smudged his entire home, which is something people do for extra protection from the paranormal. He also went on multiple visits to the elders around the community asking for advice. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as much as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they'll have endless stories and even more advice to give about how to protect yourself. One of the explanations that was given to us is that the shadow guy is evidence that someone was doing unauthorized shaky tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like an Ouija board session that takes place inside of a tent. People stand around the tent while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside asking questions. The tent begins to shake and you hear voices of the spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one because we haven't had a good enough reason to make one, but typically our ancestors use shaken tent ceremonies when they're starving in the dead of winter and need some direction on where the nearest food is. My mum's been to one. Her story's crazy. She described hearing multiple men and women only speak in native tongue, and they're upset that people were doing a shaken tent ceremony when they're not on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they're only doing the ceremony to prove that it was real, as we'd been losing our culture as a result of residential schools. But the spirits are angry, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless necessary, because you don't know who you're talking to. It could be evil spirits. You don't know. Anyway, the elders told him that this spirit crossed over into our world because of a shaken tent ceremony. Someone on the res has been doing them without consultation of the elders, so we start thinking about who would do that without the proper guidance, and so. Then, two of the drunkest dudes say, "Oh, I'm not scared. That thing can't do anything," basically egging it all on, and we're all looking at each other like, why would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how it's attracted to you. And that's when I decided to leave the sunroom where everyone's hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk crying friend when I noticed the rocking chair outside of the porch moving. I slowly moved away, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I do in my peripheral vision. Anyway, I'm inside the cottage and I keep seeing this rocking chair moving back and forth. But another thing we're raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal. Spirits feed on energy people give towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, if you start crying or yell at it, that's exactly what it wants. It thrives on energy of any kind. So while I knew something messed up was happening, I wasn't about to pay attention. 5 minutes now go by and I still see it out the corner of my eye. That's when my friend screams and she runs on the other side of the sunroom. My other friend, too, sprints to the girl, number 1, who's sitting, and busts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. Girl 1 is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit. She said she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw boy 2's face as he was looking onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he's looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was the shadow spirit on the rocking chair smiling at her, literally 3 feet away from her. That's when boy 2 sprinted towards it and burst through the French doors. I walk outside to find boy 2, and he's on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name and he looks up. All he says is, "Get everyone inside," and the tone of his voice makes me scared. I get all of us inside the cottage. This is when the phrase, "Come at me, bro," was gaining popularity. So you can imagine the drunk kid yelling that into the woods. It's terrible. I eventually get everyone inside. Boy 2 comes inside and tells everyone to clean up and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and we're clearing away the beer cans and whatever. Everyone goes inside the cottage and it's only me and boy 2 in the sunroom now. I look to him for answers and he says, "It's outside." I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we get away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, we hear knocking on multiple windows. The entire sunroom's made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see. And he says ignore it. I'm really scared now. Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, "I'll kill whoever's knocking on the bathroom window." But everyone's accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom saying that there was knocking on the window as well. Now everyone's freaking out, and me and boy 2 and our one other friend are the only sober ones now trying to calm people. We get the place clean and get outside and to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks and I'm standing there. The guy looks relaxed, then all of a sudden looks worried and shoves me inside his truck. We peel out of there quick. A few days later, I end up hanging out with boy 2 and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boys started talking about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind girl 1. He said he made eye contact with it but couldn't look away. They were staring at each other, and that's when girl 1 and boy 2's expression changed. He said it was instinct to defend the people he's with and ran towards it. He said that the feeling he was getting from the cockgee was almost like daring him to do something. He said the second he got up, the cockgee stood up and ran into the woods, disappearing into a blur of the tree line. Boy 2 ran off the porch, looking around the lawn when he saw it standing there, right next to the woods. It was smiling at him, and he heard it mocking him, calling his name, then disappearing. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting inside the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said it was standing on the far end of the truck, super close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realized that they never locked the doors. So he went back to the cottage, but his friend was too scared to go in, so he goes in on his own. But the second he opens the door, he sees that thing standing inside. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of there. The sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have them kind of experiences. It was the talk of the res. Everyone was curious about what happened. Would it come back? What was it? All I know is that it terrified us. And it's 2018 now, and no one else has seen anything like it since. If you're interested in what I look like in real life, then make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac. My husband and I love to go driving. We prefer road trips, but on the weekends or nights, we have nothing better to do than to go around cruising and just drive around. We prefer smooth and not busy roads. On this particular night, we are bored and decide to go cruising. We went up north to a small town, about half an hour from the city where the roads are curvy and smooth. This town is close to the mountains, and if you follow this particular path to the main street all the way up north, it starts driving up a mountain. It's about 9 PM, and there are very few cars in the road already since it's a little cute town. But we kept going north anyway from the houses and stores, and eventually to where the roads start curving uphill. We drive up for about 15 minutes more, and it's pitch black when we see some blinking lights. As we get closer, we see a truck that's on the side of the road facing us. I'm getting the chills thinking about being all the way up there in the middle of nowhere, and a stranded truck on the side of the road appears. As we slowly approach, I tell my husband it's probably best to turn back. I have a bad feeling, but at this point, we're pretty much at the truck. He pulls up next to us. We see that there's a young blonde guy, probably in his late 20s, who gets up to our window. I get such a bad vibe by this and tell my husband not to put his window down. I think he also gets a weird vibe and actually listens to me. He kinda just loudly asks what's wrong, and the guy just says something happened to his truck and he needs a hand. His phone is dead. Now my husband asks what happened, but this guy insists on showing him and to take a look. He says it's very friendly and even calls him bro, and he's glad we pulled up. My husband says, you know what, I won't be much help because I know nothing about cars, but I can call help for you. My friend knows a lot about cars. The guy's insisting and gets upset. I'm now looking back at the truck, and I thought I caught movement inside the truck. I tell my husband I think we should go. Now, he probably saw the look of fear on my face because he puts the car in reverse, but as he did, the guy is now behind our car, so my husband decides to go forward instead. We drive up for maybe 2 minutes, trying to find a place to turn around since the road is so narrow. The road turns to a dirt road, and there's a little more space on the side, so he's able to turn the car around. I am dreading going back that way now, and our phones have no signal at all. In my mind, I know this could all be someone with genuine problems, but this doesn't make sense. I cannot help the feeling in my gut. We soon reach the area where the truck had been, and there's no truck at all. We drive maybe another 5 minutes, no trace of one whatsoever, and we're sure we've passed the place that he said. We didn't drive up too far to begin with. I am both relieved and terrified that the truck's no longer there though. If it had really broke down, how did it get help working again in such a short amount of time? Calming myself down, I'm telling my husband, hey, maybe they really did get it to work. Maybe it turned on all of a sudden and they drove off. Suspicious, yeah, but not impossible. As we keep driving through, the roads begin to straighten out. We notice far off the truck with all the lights off, and park to the side again and notice movement in the truck. I say out loud, why did they turn out all the lights? I think they were thinking we're still far enough away from them, but we see 2 figures get on the other side of the truck and crouch down as if hiding. We get closer and my husband floors it. As we drive past, the 2 men get up. One of them is the guy that we had spoken to earlier, and the other's massive. With a very surprised look in their faces, one of them turns and runs behind us trying to catch us. I kept looking back, but it's so dark. Now all of a sudden, I see the headlights in their truck, and they start driving in our direction very fast. My husband keeps going, and eventually, we lose the headlights. I kept looking back the rest of the way, so scared that they're somehow still following us. Maybe they turned off their lights again and I can't see them. Anyway, after driving for a very long time back to the city, we're convinced no one's following us now. We do call the non-emergency line given a description, but we don't get the plates, so it's pretty much futile doing so, just given a description of the guys we saw. I realise all this could be rationalised, but it makes no sense why one guy was hiding and how they tried desperately to follow us. I hate the fact that they're still out there. I just pray we never encounter them again. I don't know if this is an Eastern Coast thing, but in my little town, there's a twice the ice station. Basically, you fill up water jugs and get ice bags for cheaper than you can in the grocery store. I went out a few nights ago to get some water, because hey, who wants to be drinking tap water? My husband was home, and because I'm kind of heavily pregnant, he insisted that he go instead, but I really wish that he would have done. I was out at 1 AM, and it's dark for miles in the middle of nowhere. As I get out of my car, I open the back seat to get the gallon jugs and close the door. The moment I do, a dark blue truck van pulls up behind me. I presume that they're doing the same thing as me, and I don't really think too much of it. However, alarm bells start going off, and the alarm bells start screaming at me when the slide door opens up and two large men step out. It's about a 20-foot distance between me and them, so the first thing I do is pull out my phone and start making a pretend phone call saying, "Yeah, I'm almost home." As soon as they see me answer, one guy says "crap," and they both get in there, tires literally screeching as they bolt out of there. I throw the jugs into my car, empty, and lock all the doors a million times before I broke down calling my husband. He told me to write down the make and model of the car and colour, and we'd go to the police station first thing tomorrow. Now I don't know if they targeted me because I was a woman alone in the middle of nowhere, but deep down, I know they targeted me because I was pregnant, and I don't want to think what would have happened if they got me. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor centre concert thing. We parked to the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our home, and the venue's another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concert, I end up losing my friends in the crowd. I don't care though, as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert ends. Well, of course I lost my phone somewhere in the crowd of people, and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone, and I start to freak out a little. But it's 10 PM when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus is coming. Just my luck, it's a special holiday, so no buses until 10 AM. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers I know, my mum and brother. My mum doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the suck it up talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city I don't know. I try walking but quickly give up when I realise I'm basically walking down a random highway towards God knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm heading, and I say the truth. He is conveniently going to the same city, asking if I take a split to a cab. Realizing this is my only option, as I said I don't have my own money, we get in the car. Turns out he has less than I do. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my home, but at least I know my way from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25. He scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting I come back with him, even writing his number on my leg. As we get there, I realise the situation I'm in. We're about to get out at a quiet area at 2 AM and the cabbie's going to drive off, leaving no one to hear me scream. The second he gets out, I turn to the driver begging him to take me further, so I can at least put some distance between us. The cab driver said he hadn't heard a word the whole way, but definitely heard something odd. He asked me for my address and takes me all the way home, and the creeper stares in frustration as he drives off. When I got home, I offered to wake up my mum to pay him, but he declined, saying he's just glad I'm safe. I broke him through the kitchen window to get to bed and cried myself to sleep. I'm just glad the cab driver was so kind to me. I really enjoy going camping. I'm truly an outdoorsy kind of person. It's very rare that I ever have a bad experience while camping, but I did have one that stood out to me, and is one that I can't explain. So let me start off by saying this was a good few years ago, and everything seemed normal on the day. In fact, I was having a really good day, so I arrived for my 4-day planned hike and camp in the evening. I had a really easy to set up tent, so it didn't really matter what time I got there. Now I wanted to sleep on the first day, because I was tired from driving. So I park my car up, and I realise I'm the only person in the parking area. I get out and hear some voices, but they immediately stop when I get outside. I look and realise that I've accidentally left the radio on, so I just turn it off, get my camping gear out and head out. Now everything feels normal. The sun's setting, so I can still see where I'm going, and honestly, the forest and area that I'm in looks truly beautiful. I'm not gonna lie, it's probably the nicest sunset I've ever seen. There was sort of a mist above the trees. I took a couple photos on my phone, and I was really glad I did. I actually still use one as a screensaver, but that's not the point. I find this beautiful spot that I've been to before. It's close to a lake. I set up my camp and equipment, and what's better to do than some night fishing? So I head off towards that. I have an inflatable raft that I can use for my fishing. I have a small Bluetooth speaker with me, and set that down and set off. I'm having a brilliant time. Unfortunately, I haven't caught anything, but I do have this strange feeling washing over me. It's almost like a paranoia that I can't quite describe. Now the forests and wilderness can be a beautiful area during the day, but at night, even for an avid camper like me, it can be pretty scary. I stay still for a second, and I'm sure I can hear the same kind of voices from before. That's odd. I turn off my speaker so I can concentrate more. I know it's definitely not from what I was listening to previously, but I put my mind on fishing. I want to catch some dinner. Now as I'm fishing, I hear this strange thumping sound like someone slamming something on a tree. It's odd, it's almost like someone's taken a metal hammer to an old oak tree and is smashing it. It's in a very rhythmic manner though, stopping for a few seconds and starting again. Now, needless to say, this confuses the hell out of me. and I begin to hear more voices. I can't tell exactly what they're saying, but I decide that, you know what, I think it's better to be out in my camping site at least. That's where I have my weapons if I really need it, that I've buried now under some leaves. The thought flashed across my mind that, oh god, imagine if they found my site and my weapons, then I'd really be screwed, and I laughed to myself. So I start paddling back. As I do, I've realised that the sound has now stopped, but also that it's coming from the opposite side of the lake. I have a horrible feeling about this. I don't know of any other campers in the area, but hey, it's not the first time I've encountered anyone out there, and I make it back to the shore. As I do so, I get my stuff together, leave my raft deflated on the side, knowing I can come back for it in the morning, and I head out. As I do, the thumping starts again. This time it's louder and closer than it was before. Okay, that's really odd, and I've now picked up the pace. I'm thinking about calling out, but I realise it's not a good idea in case these are actually bad people. I glance behind me for a second, and I can just about make out the flash of a light before it cuts off the second I turn my head. Now, I don't need any more signs, and I literally start sprinting back to my campsite. As I do, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched and followed. The thudding sound slowly stops as I'm jogging, but I'm not going to wait around for it. I quickly pack up all my stuff. I decide I'm going to sleep in my car just until I figure out what's going on the next morning. I look and thankfully find my gun, exactly where I left it. I feel a lot more safe now. I start sprinting towards my car, and as I do, I can hear rustling around me. I'm now terrified. I call out, whoever's there, I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's wild is this doesn't even deter them. I start to think maybe it's a group of animals stalking me like coyotes or something, the last thing I need. As I'm running, I can see the figure of a person near my car. I shine my torch and I can see the reflection of animal eyes. I don't really get a lot of time to figure out exactly what animal it is, but it gives me some relief knowing it's not a person. As I get closer, there's this disgusting smell. Just as I reach for the door, I can see that this isn't actually an animal. It's just an animal's head that's been freshly cut on the roof of my car. What the hell? I now let out a really loud scream that I don't even have to think about making. I quickly get in my car and turn on the lights. I can see the silhouette of a person in front of me now, who quickly ducks down. I instantly slam it into reverse, but I've realised I'm having a really bad panic attack, and I need to wait at least 3 seconds or so before I start driving, before it gets any worse. Just as I'm doing so, I can see the flashes of more torches behind me. I instantly snap out of it, and immediately step on the accelerator and speed the hell out of there. I then instantly call the police to report what's happened. I can't believe that this actually happened to me. How could a nice relaxing getaway turn into this? How the hell did that animal head get there? Who were them people? The police agreed to meet me further up the road, and I agreed to help go back to figure out exactly what's happened. I'm literally shaking, but I feel a lot safer with the police officer there. He says he's never heard of anything like it before happening. When we get there, there's no longer a feeling of being watched. Disgustingly enough, the animal head's still on the floor, close to the exit where it rolled off my car. The officer says that someone must have done this very recently because of the way it sat and the blood around it. He does a quick patrol and can't find anything in the area I go to the lake and show him exactly where I saw the first torch. I'm now able to retrieve my raft too, but there's no signs of anyone out there. He says he's literally never seen anything like this before, and that whoever done this is long gone, and I agreed to go back to the station with him to make a bigger report. Turns out, there's lots of reports of occultist activity in the area that neither me or the officer knew about previously. Apparently they make regular animal sacrifices, and worse, they attempt to kidnap people, and have done so before. Unfortunately for me, they never found exactly who did this, and I still have more questions than answers, and I never went back to that same area again. We live in Oregon, and we drove down to the coast of Northern California. We had a late start leaving our houses, and arrived at a little beach south of the Redwoods just after 9 PM. It's pouring rain and dark out, so we park on a dirt road that had access to the beach, and decided against walking down on the sand to set up my camp. My friend drives an old Toyota pickup with a camper shell cover in the bed, which has a mattress in the back, so we decide just to sleep on here. The beach area where we were is very secluded, and belonging to a local Native American tribe. They didn't mind us visiting, as long as we're respectful. After talking for a while in the shelter of the truck canopy, my friend fell asleep before drifting off myself. I realised I had forgotten the passenger lock of the truck. All of our valuables were stored in the cab, so I hoped nobody would come along to rob us in our sleep. After a few dreamless hours, I heard the sound of the driver's side door handle of my friend's truck being lifted. That door happened to be locked, but I was awake, terrified that whoever had tried to open the door would now go around to unlock the side, or try to get in bed where we are. It was still dark out at this time, but I heard footsteps starting to walk around to the back. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the back window of the camper shell, in hopes of alerting the intruder that there's people here. I heard footsteps get a little further away. Then I heard the sounds of snapping twigs and something heavy being thrown. Then the man let out a long yell, screaming a swear word at the top of his lungs. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 yells before I woke up my friend. "Dude, there's a crazy guy outside. He tried getting in the truck, now he's walking around yelling," I blurt out as I shook his shoulder. We sat upright peering out of the windows, but it's still pitch black out. I check my phone and it's 5 AM. The sound of the man walking around the woods near the truck don't let up. He's still screaming now, and it seems to be getting louder. He would occasionally yell further away, but then appear closer. We sat huddled in fear for a good hour, unsure of what to do. His shout sounded as though he was full of rage, but he never attempted to get into the truck again. Eventually, the owners of the only other car parked there come to their vehicle and drove off as the sky started to lighten. We did not hear any more yelling or log frying after that, and eventually we're both able to sleep for a bit, waking up at around 10 AM. It's hard to believe that during that terrifying hour we heard what we did, and it was so vivid. We still had no idea what the man was doing or why he was so angry, but the guy screaming profanities still remains a mystery to me. This happened when I was probably 7 or 8. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. We lived in those long apartments. Ones are attached to the sides rather than stacked on top of each other. The front of the apartment faced a main road, and there's a little street to access the park and woods and back area of the apartment. Behind the apartment is a massive field, and the forest. Me and my friends and I used to go there to build hobbit holes in the grass. My mum hated it when we went out there because there were some rough people that lived in the neighbourhood. She didn't like the idea of 7-year-olds playing out there in the same place where people do drugs. I'm adding some more details so you can get a picture. Now one day, I was out in the woods by myself, just exploring and pretending to be Indiana Jones or something, and I was coming out of the tall grass. I could see the little back alley in between the parking area and the woods, and I saw something lying in the grass. I believe it's a deer. I think it's just sleeping, so I creep up on it, trying to not scare it. I know, cool. That was quite funny. When I got there, I knew something was off. The deer was too still and smelled horrible. I couldn't see its face, and its back was facing me, but when I got up to it, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw its entire stomach is ripped open. I wasn't a smart kid, but I knew this was messed up. When I turned to run back home to tell my mom, I saw another deer nailed to a tree next to the first. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but its 2 front hooves are literally nailed to it. It's a disgusting scene, as you can imagine. As I stood there, staring at it, a car drove past a little alley. I remember it's a white car with tinted windows driving really slowly. I mean, everyone drove slowly on this alley because it's a residential street, but these people were barely moving. I can't see inside, but I got the sinking feeling that they were watching me. Obviously, I can't be sure that they are, but I'm 99% sure it was them. Once they were gone, I booked it home and told my mum the whole thing. She told me not to go in the field again, and I agree. I really hated what I saw. For the next month or so, I saw that car drive everywhere. It would drive up and down the main road I was on while I was playing in the front yard. It would drive down and back towards the alley when I would be back in the yard. I even remembered seeing it at a grocery store once, but they were definitely staking the house out. It was always the white car, tinted windows, maybe they're following me, and always driving way too slowly to be normal. I tell my mum about it, but she chalks it up to a neighbour just going down the road. So one day, my mum was out mowing the lawn. Because of the way the apartment is, she had to push the lawnmower all the way around the apartments to get to our backyard. Being the helpful kid I was going to meet my mum out the back to open the gate so she can put the lawnmower in the shed. As I'm walking out the gate, I see the car come along the back alley. Normally, the car goes slow. As soon as it turns a corner, however, the driver steps on the gas, zooming up behind me. The back door closest to me opens and someone gets out and starts running towards me. I don't remember what he looked like or even if it was a he. I just remembered getting back home as quick as I can, terrified. After that, my dad yelled at me for peeing myself, and neither he nor my mum believed me about the guy in the car, and I never saw him again, and we moved a few months later. That sounds really harsh, Jesus. My parents still think I made up the whole thing, even though they thought how sketchy the neighbourhood was. I don't remember anyone going missing at that time in my town, but I never really looked it up. All I know is it was really messed up, and I have no idea who those people were and why they did that to the deer or what they planned for me. I just hope they never done anything to anyone else. This happened a few years ago, and we didn't know exactly who this man was, but it still scared me senselessly. When I was about 13, I used to have my bed right under my bedroom window. It was also around the time my dog was brought inside because she got too old to stay out. At the time, we didn't have screens covering the doors like we do now, or the windows, so the windows could easily be opened and there's no barrier. I always left my window open during the day to let in fresh air, then close and lock it when it starts getting dark. The house is surrounded by forest, not very thick, but still thick enough that you can't clearly see through it. It's completely normal to hear strange noises at night, because things like bears or stray dogs or even former neighbours' chickens would roam around through our backyard. So when I heard something shuffling around my window, I didn't think much of it, and continued playing video games. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard something hit against it. It may have just been a large June bug. When they hit a window, it sounds like rocks being thrown, so I literally ignore it. The knocking kept going, but I just kept ignoring it until finally it stopped. Fast forward until around 2 AM. I was finally settling down and going to sleep when I hear breathing. Very faint, enough to miss if my room wasn't silent. I heard something drag down my window, like a stick or finger. I did it a few times, and that was enough for me. I jump out of bed, running to my dad's room. I told him that there was something at my window, and he immediately came to look. We turned on the lights, and nothing's there. I told him what I heard, and he said he's gonna look in the morning. We did just that, and my stomach churned. Under my window, there were two completely different foot tracks, one back and forth besides the generator, looking directly under my window. There's even cigarette butts laying on the floor, and ashes. Like they've been there for a while. The foot tracks led towards the woods, and seemed to stop there. We have no idea who this was, and to this day even thinking of this terrifies me. Afterward we put locks on the windows and screens up, but I'll never forget that day. Okay, so this was a normal rainy evening when I was 14. I played games until my mum come in and told me to go to sleep. But before I get to the creepy parts, I'll give you an overview of our home. Our house is located on a hill. The closest neighbours are literally 100 meters further at the road. This road leads to nowhere, so there are rarely people going past our home. Behind the house is a little forest area that I used to play in as a child. And also, the house has 2 floors. My room is at the second upper floor. Yeah, I gotta admit it's a lonely house, with rain, darkness, and a forest that could keep me a little bit worried if I didn't know what was in there. So I went to sleep as usual at 11 PM. I fell asleep very quickly. However, at 3 AM I woke up, and I didn't do that so often. I think I had to go to the bathroom or something, so I went to pee and look through the window and do my thing. But it wasn't that relaxing nightly forest that I saw. My eyes glued on a specific character in the darkness. A man wearing dark clothes was just standing at the path of the forest. I don't know what he was doing. I started to panic, of course, and switched off the bathroom lights really quick. I sneak up to my parents downstairs, and I've never felt so afraid moving in my home in my life. We had alarms on, but it didn't calm me. I took a look at my parents. They're asleep. My sister's not up either. I went to the kitchen and peeked through the window. There he was, still standing at the pathway, closer now. And now I can see his body. I can't figure out his face. He looks huge. I just sat at the window, scared and almost falling to tears. Little rain poured to the ceiling and made naturally chill sounds. That didn't help. I peeked through the window again, and I almost jump out of my skin when he's standing in the yard now. I can see his face. He looks terrifying. I now ran to my parents to wake them up. My father ran out the back door, but my mum said that he could be dangerous and might be armed. She calls the police. Movement inside the house made the guy move, and he runs towards the road and the forest. My father swore that he couldn't go after him, but was mad that he couldn't. Now we wait for the cops to show up. Eventually they show up and ask questions and check out the forest with my dad. At this point, I went to sleep again with my mum, terrified but managed to sleep. I still have nightmares about this today. When I was young, me and my brother loved to go and play and explore in the forest near where we lived. We had a group of neighbourhood friends that we'd also do this with, and to be honest, those were some of my best memories. However, this would all change one day, and everything seems like normal. We set off on a normal summer's evening, and we decide we're going to play hide and seek. Now to get to where we play, we have to walk through a bit of a swampland. I say swamp, it's not really a swamp, but it feels very similar to one. So we're walking through this, stumbling around, and finally make it to the giant tree. This is the exact tree that marks the spot where we play. So, I have to look for people unfortunately, but it's my turn, so that's fine. I hide behind this tree and start counting. I finally get to 1 and say I'm ready for you lot. And I burst out laughing when I see one of my stupid friends has literally climbed on top of the tree, hit directly above me, got caught instantly, then starts panicking that he can't get down. I help him down and I say, "You search the left side, I'm gonna go a bit deeper and find these." He says fine. To be honest, more than anything, I can't wait to tell the others how stupid he was. As I'm walking, I see something up ahead. It's a dark figure. I laugh and start sprinting up there. I stumble on the way and hurt my knee though, so I was quite annoyed about this. But by the time I get there, the figure's moved. Now I'm looking around and something feels very odd. It feels like I'm being watched, but not like in hide and seek. This is almost like a much darker, ominous presence is there. I've literally never had a feeling like it since then. So I look around when I see part of a hand. Well, it's not a hand, it's a stick that looks like a hand, but I can make out what it is in the shadows. As I get closer, I see it's holding something. I think that's really odd. I get a bit closer and realise that it's a skeleton hand. One that looks slightly degraded, like it's been there for some time. Halloween's around the corner, so I'm sure it's a Halloween prop. I hold up the piece of paper and look inside. It says run. It's not in any of my friend's handwriting. And then, to my horror, I see a shadow appear behind me. I glance back for a second, and there's 2 giants of men standing there in full camo gear, with smirks on their faces. I drop the paper and let out this blood-curdling scream, and I begin to sprint my way back. I end up going all the way to the tree, and to my horror, I'm met by all of my friends there, who can see how scared I am, and we all sprint all the way back home. When I get there, I explain what's happened, and my brother's so scared he starts crying, where he's younger than me. We're more scared of getting in trouble with our parents, don't even bother telling them. But looking back on it now, I really wish I'd done something more at the time, like told the authorities or something. I hate the thought that there's some twisted, mental people out there that would do something like this. God knows what their intentions were, but I can guarantee you that they weren't good. A little backstory first. I grew up in upstate New York. about 30 minutes north of Zayacras to be exact. It only made sense that I would return to my quiet little part of the world after I got out of the Marines in 2007. The only problem is that I didn't have much money. The good news is that my grandfather had an old pool behind camper that he told me I could have until I got on my own feet. So, being on my own, I decided I'd spend about a year in the pool behind on a few acres of woods that I bought from a friend of mine while I was in the Marines. Now all my taxes had been paid for the year, so the only thing I had to do was pay for gas and propane. I managed to avoid looking like a crazy mountain man by showering and washing my clothes at a local truck stop / diner, even getting a pretty decent job working security. I filled the rest of my time working odd jobs for extra cash. Alright, so for the main story. It was mid-April. I was sitting next to a nice low fire while listening to my battery-powered radio, watching nightfall in the woods. I had gotten a nice dinner at the diner down the road, so I didn't have any work for the next few days. Generally, I don't see anyone in the woods for weeks at a time, so I wasn't expecting it when I hear a scream to break the silence. I shot up, grab my shotgun, and get out of the camper and check the chamber to make sure it's loaded. I stood on the edge of a small clearing, strained my ears to listen for any sounds. It's generally hard to pinpoint sounds in the dead of night in the woods, but luckily I hear some shouting and car doors slamming, so I knew that the sounds had to be coming from the main vehicle trail a short distance from my campsite. I made my way to the trail as fast as I could in the low light, and before I get halfway there, I heard another clipped scream to my left. I could hear a rustling in the brush. I slowly made my way there, and to where I think the noise is coming from, I come out of the woods right next to a man who had a woman pinned to the ground, just standing over her. Shaking from adrenaline, I leveled the shotgun at the top of the guy, and the woman growled at him to get off. Now I'm a big guy, but I have no doubt that the shotgun was the deciding factor in this whole situation. Each of these guys easily had a solid 30 pounds of muscle on me when I was a 200-pound Marine. I ushered the two idiots back, so I was between them. The woman's now getting to her feet. It was about now I realised we have another problem. My cell phone was cheap and didn't get reception in the woods, and hers had been broken by these two sickos. There wasn't much I could do other than march these two back to their jeep under the threat of shotgun. I get the license number, and I'm sure it was fake, and a description of them and their vehicle. Before the driver gets in the vehicle, I lower the shotgun to his crotch and made sure he understood what a 3-inch 12-gauge shell loaded would do. They took off in one direction. Me and the woman made our way back to my campsite. We drove to the DEC station and reported it as quick as possible. It turns out that the guy I'd threatened was the young girl's now ex-boyfriend. They'd been out having a few drinks when the third wheel in the situation got a little too handsy for her liking. When she said something to her boyfriend, he basically told her to stop and get on with it for once. When she refused, the boyfriend smashed her phone and pushed her to the ground. They both pushed her into the truck and drove her deep into the woods. She had waited for them to become complacent before throwing the back door open and jumping out and taking off. Luckily, the Jeep was crap, and the back door didn't lock. It was a stroke of luck that I happened to be outside when she escaped. Fast forward 7 months, and that woman I helped is now my wife, and we moved into our first house using the money I saved up living in the woods. We've been married for 8 years now, and I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. I still go out to camp every year to hunt and haven't seen the Jeep or the guys again. We heard through the grapevine that they had been arrested and actually got jail time. I'm assuming they moved to a different area because I never saw them again. I live in a suburban part of a small rural town in eastern Missouri, in a pretty quiet neighborhood. We've had one crime here in the past 3 years, and it was me who committed it. A jaywalker. Comprised mostly of elderly women and single mothers. We own 4 vehicles: my car, my mum's van, my stepdad's car, and my mum's old truck that's illegal to drive now. So I was home alone, about a week after my graduation, while my stepdad's at work. My mum was talking to my youngest brothers, and they had to go to the doctor's office, so they left. And my 2 middle brothers were at their friend's house, so I was lounging on the couch in my fuzzy robe and underwear playing Fallout. Good game. My stepdad is a professional chef and does 80% of our cooking at home. I have terrible anxiety and an addiction to investigation discovery. So whenever I'm home alone, I keep the longest, sharpest knife on myself or within an arm's reach at all time. It may have saved my life. Or something. This is confusing. There's a knock at the door, and it's not too suspicious. We frequently get solicitors and Mormons in the neighborhood, so I wasn't worried. Being a cautious person, I peek out through the curtains just a bit to see who it was. I'd seen this guy around the neighborhood before, walking around, and I don't feel threatened by him, since if it got physical, I had at least 5 inches on him and a knife. Anyway, I want to open the door, and I do so, figuring that at worst, I can politely turn him away, tell him I wasn't interested and go on with my life. At best, well, not gonna lie, he's cute in a generic way. So, I open the door, resting my hand on the back of the couch, where I've hidden the knife under a blanket, just in case. As soon as I opened the door, I knew there's something off. I've got a blunted effect due to a combination of depression, PTSD from abuse, and schizophrenic type personality disorder. So, I'm grown up, and I'm used to using fake facial expressions to fit in. I thought maybe he had similar problems because his face was not normal. He had a big friendly smile, right below a pair of absolutely dead eyes. "Hey beautiful, day out. Mind if I come in for a moment?" he said awkwardly. I kinda smile awkwardly and say, no, my mum don't like having strangers in. "Oh," his smile gets bigger. "What are you doing?" At this point, I'm starting to feel nervous. I shrug. Can't complain, I guess. "Are you here to sell something or tell me about God?" He shrugged back. "Oh, you know? Can I come in? Maybe talk to your mum?" I'll go get her. She's in the backyard." I moved to close the door and step back, not turning my back to the dude. Before I closed the doorway, he reached out and stops the door. His fake smile is gone. His face is dead. Not angry, just dead. "You're home alone. Your mum isn't in the backyard." I pause and swallow hard. Then I push the door again. "What do you want, man?" "To come in. Please let me in." I reach over, quickly sliding the knife from under my blanket and pointing it at him, saying, "I'm not gonna let you in. Leave." He looks down at the knife, back up at me, blinks rapidly, then affixated the smile to his face again, saying, "Oh, no problem. Goodbye." I watched him turn around and walk back down the street until he turned the corner. Then I locked and deadbolted every door and window in the house, got the dog out of my mum's bedroom, and resumed my gaming. Nah, I ended up calling my aunt's boyfriend, the only cop I trust, let him know what happened, stayed on the phone with him until my mum got home from the doctors. She called around town, found a couple of other people who'd seen him walking and driving around, but none of them knew who he was. So, we were on high alert for about a week. It's been over a month now, and nobody in town's seen him. This old memory of mine, I've been talking about a lot because of the recent news of the Delefi murders. As the man I'm talking about looks similar to the first sketch, but this is 20 years ago and the sketch is now irrelevant. But anyway, when I was 12, I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. If you're not familiar with this part of Arizona, it's not what you think of when you think of Arizona. It's a pondosaur pine forest with mountains, and it snows in the winter. Anyway, across the street from my home was an entrance to some woods with paths. As my parents worked, and I was the first one home after school, it was my responsibility to walk the dog. Usually, I would take him just inside the woods entrance so I wouldn't have to pick up his crap from under the rocks that would usually be in sight. Now, usually, I was too afraid to go into the actual woods, even with my dog, because he was stronger than me and didn't listen to me well when we were outside. The other reason I didn't like it is the wolves, packs of wild dogs, sometimes cattle, seriously, and of course, anything lurking. But this day, I felt adventurous, I guess, and took him over there. We went pretty deep that day, and I didn't see another soul because it's about 3 PM and the people are at work. None of the neighborhood kids really hang out there either. Now my dog was excited by anything that moved and always wanted to greet another person, cat or dog. But this day, on the way back, I remembered him being steadfast, still pulling, walking me along on the way back home, ignoring squirrels and trees blowing in the wind. Then, out of nowhere, a man appeared on the trail in front of me. Now when I say out of nowhere, that's exactly what I mean. The woods are not dense, and usually you can see people from a mile away, as long as they don't surprise you. The man was dressed head to toe in brown and tan colours and gave a weak "hey" and doesn't make eye contact. The way he dressed stuck out to me, as everything but the treetops was brown, as there's actually a drought going on at the time. Even the picture I linked is more greener than it was then. As he passed me, I took a few more steps and turned around because he made uneasy and steady pace behind me, but he was gone. I could see probably 50 feet of the trail behind me. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to see him still. My kid brain starts going, maybe it's a ghost. No, he must be hiding. There's no way I wouldn't be able to see him immediately after passing each other. Maybe he was hiding in front of me, before he came out of nowhere. Maybe that's why he's got all brown on, trying to blend in. The dog didn't want to greet him anyway. It didn't make sense. It didn't take long for my dog and I to take off running all the way home. Thank God I had my goofy dog on me, because he was pretty aloft, but also protective. For all I know, maybe the disappearing woodsman watched me take my dog out every day, saw me wander in that day. I know I let my dog crap in the yard a few weeks afterwards. The reason it was so weird is that he was pretty much in perfect camouflage, and he had no dog on him or reason to be out there. I'm not sure exactly who it was. It definitely wasn't a hunter either, because hunting's illegal, and that's what creeps me out. Why on earth would anyone be in camouflage in the woods where hunting's illegal? My boyfriend and I went backpacking in the mountains. I've been camping before, but only camping in a car, so never had to carry a bag on me for a long period of time. So this is my first time actually backpacking. Now after getting lost trying to find a parking lot, the map swore there was, but there actually wasn't. We drove around the mountains, finally finding a parking lot we could stay at. We'd planned to walk down the mountain, camp, then walk back up the following day. About an hour in, it's maybe 6 PM, and we come across this guy sitting off the side of the trail, cooking in a cheap stove. He said to us if we know why we're there and where we're at, and saying can we point him in the direction of a certain place on the mountain. He says he's parked there. He continues talking about how he had a friend drop him off who was going to pick him up at point A, and then changes his story to that he's parked at point B, and then said another friend dropped him off and went to hike somewhere else, and that he needed a map or something to get to point C. Yeah, I'm confused, and I don't like his story. We finally bid the dude good luck, saying we can't help, and continue down the trail. Now the trail is poorly marked and doesn't correspond with the map we found online, so we're really confused when we come to a horse trail with no markings to tell us if we're on the right path still. We decide to go down the trail and see if we can find a place to camp for the night and find our way out in the morning. Both sides of the trail are lined with barbed wire, preventing us from being able to camp there. Eventually, we run into a huge puddle in the middle of the trail. We decide to turn back and go back to the part of the trail before it turns into a horse trail. That way, we can camp there for the night, because it's really dark and we're tired. About 20 feet behind us, we see the man from earlier. He talks to us again, and through conversation, we learned he had heavy narcotics, including fentanyl, and another one I don't remember the name of. By this time, there's so many red flags, so we took off, deciding to go back to the car and just drive home now. We live 4 hours away, and we're about 6 miles from the car, so we take off up the trail as fast as we can go. I got severely dehydrated on the way and was struggling. I have lots of water, but it's very hot out. And we're practically running up the mountain now. Eventually, I start hallucinating, thinking I'm vomiting blood, which is red Gatorade, or there was blood coming from my shoes, which is sweat. And there may or may not have been a bear somewhere nearby, but I could have hallucinated it also. We ended up doing the full 6 miles up the mountain in only 2 hours. We reached a parking lot, and that's when I gave up. I decided to wait on a branch while my boyfriend got in the car. The parking lot was curved, so we're out of sight from each other. But he finally came back down to me with the car and helped me in. We found a gas station and slept for a little while before heading home. As we're driving out the park, we see a warning sign saying there may be an escaped convict in the area. This is a true story that happened to me. Back in the 80s, I was a camper at this place in the Erratic, a 6 million acre state park in upstate New York. All camps have their own customs, and I'm not sure if this occurred elsewhere, but if sitting around a campfire and smoke was blinding your face, we would utter the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and I swear this worked. The smoke would immediately move towards another direction. And no, it wasn't the breathiness of speaking the words that made the smoke move. It was rumoured to be a voodoo chant though. So things are different in the 80s. Things we did back then Might have gotten you kicked out of camp if you got caught, but to be honest with you, these days, you would probably catch a court case and get jail time. Like the time my counsellor locked me in his room with a 6-pack of Budweiser, tall boys, and told me I can't come out until I finished. But that's a separate story. This camp was right on a very large and pristine lake, and periodically, there would be hikes and canoe trips to some of the islands on the lake. You choose your adventure, basically. So we're on this canoe hike to a large, huge, massive island that's not too far from camp at all. We're all slackers, smokers and stoners on this hike. My kind of people. The island was so big, it had a pretty wide running trail that went around the perimeter of the island, wide enough to comfortably ride a 4-wheeler around. Were they allowed? Wider than I was tall at the time, wide. So I mentioned this is in the 80s, right? That first night, some of us campers were partying with the counsellors, beers were being drunk. Now at the time we're sitting around a fire, of course, and when the smoke blew into someone's face, they said the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and the smoke moved. The next reciprocate of the smoke said the same words, and so on. And the smoke was being moved around fast from person to person. At the height of the frenzied chanting, the smoke almost looks like a vortex. The next morning, I opened my tent to see lying on the ground, spanning the width of the running trail, the biggest dead rabbit I've ever seen in my life. It was dead. It had eyes that were glazed over blue and white. I've really never seen anything like this before. I know it could have just been coincidence, but it was crazy. This happened a couple of years ago. I wanted to go to the local wildlife trail to walk in the woods. I'd gone several times to hike and jog. I normally went with my boyfriend at the time, but he was working and I wanted to go, so I decided to go by myself. I felt pretty comfortable going. I park at the far end of the parking lot in case anyone else appears. The trail continues straight from the parking lot for about a mile until it curves up a large hill. Where I wanted to go was the abandoned parking lot with a lake. The turn off to this part of the trail was about 400 yards down to the left. Once you turn left, you have about 200 yards of flat trail before it inclines. This inclined section is loose gravel and it's quite noisy when you walk up it. The last section is about 100 yards. I felt pretty at ease going along the straight trail before I turned left. When I hit the incline, I began to feel uneasy. I brushed it off as being overly paranoid and continued. As I went about halfway up the incline, I began to hear crunching and snapping of twigs in the woods to my right. It sounded about 100 yards off. It was just far enough into the woods that I couldn't see what's making the noise. I froze in my tracks and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stood still as I heard the crunching stop. Stupidly, I brushed it off as a deer or bobcat. I continue up the path until I hit the end of the incline. That's when I heard this thing in the woods beginning to run at me. I froze in fear, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. Every hair on my body stood up. I was rooted in place. That's when I saw him. A man was running straight for me while holding something in his hand. I began to run down the incline back to the main trail. I was slipping and sliding down the gravel. I looked behind me and noticed how that he's at the top of the incline already. He had this evil look in his eyes. I noticed the item in his hands was a knife. I almost slipped up due to me looking back at the man. He called out to me, "Get back here now." His tone was malicious. I sprinted as fast as I could, and took a hard right back onto the main path. When I hit the parking lot, I didn't look back. I unlocked my car and started as quick as I can. Right as I was backing up, he emerges from the trail entrance. He just stands there, partially covered in the shade of the trees. As I tear through the parking lot and onto the highway, he just stares at me. The biggest, creepiest smile comes across his face as he slowly waves at me as I get onto the highway. I never went back to that trail. This encounter has scarred me for the rest of my life. I hate walking through the woods now. Okay, so I have no idea exactly what I saw that night. I have searched everywhere for sightings or even myths around that area we saw it and found nothing. If anyone has any idea what we saw, please let me know. My husband and I think it could have well been a Wendigo, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone else say they've seen anything like it. I guess more than anything I want to know what I saw and have some closure. So anyway, my friends and I go camping a lot, and my favourite place is the Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We go there often. I've been going there since I was an infant. I'm 28 now, married with a kid and still go. It's the coolest place to go where I live, and you can actually see the Milky Way pretty much every night. I mean, it's perfect for stargazing, and I've seen a shooting star every clear night that I've been there. When we go there without our kid, we might have a hike and stargaze for hours. Our first experience happened when we were night hiking, and we would go on trails we knew well, and we used frequently during the day. Ones with log fences and gazebo resting places. The most used trail is in the National Bridge State Park that leads up to the Natural Bridge. The trail is around 2 miles uphill depending on where you're starting. Now I've done this trail every summer of my life and could do it blindfolded. It has wooden steps, carved rock steps, log handrails, multiple sitting points under a roof, trash cans, but after reaching the main trailhead there's no lights at all. It's used often, and while it's uphill and the difficulty is low, as long as you have a good grip on your shoes and water, you'll be fine. My friends have done it with me multiple times and we're confident as hell at it. Hiking this trail at night is not allowed, but the woods have never really been a problem for me and no one really cared about the closure times. When we use this main trail to hike to the top, we would park in a lot designated for the Pull and Hoedown Island. You walk across the road that leads to the pool and you're at the first trail marker. You go up the gravel for a while and pass the Natural Bridge State Park Lodge. There's a waterfall and some lights, so it was best to go fast and watch out for rangers that would tell us to leave. Then walk across another road and there's a mini shelter to sit on or a small rock where you can rest your legs. Then it's the beginning of the top of the trail. The night was weird to begin with. As soon as we started the hike, the clouds took over and it appeared we'd be walking for nothing even to stargaze at. But we went anyway, just in case it cleared out by the time we get there. In the beginning, it was normal, and paranoia was kinda setting in, but eased up a little. You know you've reached the bottom of the bridge when you see a giant limestone wall. Now during this time, there was a gazebo that sat to the right of this wall, and the trail continued and followed next to the wall. When you come far, there's a fairly steep part of the trail and the gazebo is welcomed. Now my husband, my best friend at the time, and I all sit on the gazebo steps. The bench is under a roof, and even darker than the rest of the outside, so we just stayed on the steps, facing to where we're looking downhill at the trail that follows the limestone wall. We each have a bright LED headlamp, and a handheld flashlight. We don't usually look at each other when we night hike because the lights are so bright. We sit in a line like the Lord's Supper and walk in a line staggered so we don't blind each other. It's after hours at this point, so no ski lift rides had gone on for hours, and the rangers had already done the sweep and left before we could get there. We left no time between them making sure the trail and the top were clear and start our hike. The ski lifts takes you to the top, but there are workers that stay and do counts and only leave after it's clear. I guess I have to make these points because that's what I was thinking when what seemed out of nowhere, a girl with a headlamp begins to walk down the trail. This is kind of odd really. She's in a sundress and flip-flops. This hike is uphill, and while it's fairly easy to hike up, it's not easy to do without real shoes or water. She'd have to have hiked up and down to get to this point without food or water, which is a massive challenge. Her light seemed almost blinding too. When she reached where the trail turns from in front of the gazebo to down where we came from, she stopped. She just stood there, how a human is presented in an anatomical drawing. She was looking directly at us all, sitting there, and her light made me bring my head up. It was so bright that I literally had to shield my eyes. She didn't turn away from our light at all, or even seem bothered. She had 6 LEDs shining directly at her face. I say hello. She said, kind of with a pause between every word, something like, "Hello, how are you?" I said something like, "Good, how are you?" And she took an even longer pause before saying, "Oh, I'm fine." And she just stood there with her hands to her side, facing down, staring at us. Her light made it impossible to really see her face. It was unnaturally bright. I had my hand up the entire time to not be blinded still, until she turned and slowly walked down the trail part we just came up. She got to the part where the trail turned, and we saw her light just stay in that one spot for a minute, until she turned and the light faded out of sight. We wait for a while before continuing up. I kept making comments about how weird that was, and had anybody else just seen this? And was I being overly paranoid with my fear? And why did no one come after her? Why had she done this all alone at night? And somehow without being found by any ranger? We got up after a bit and started back up to the top. It felt like it took much longer than it ever had in the past, but we made it to the top. There's stone steps named Fat Man Squeeze that you get to at the top of the bridge, and you can walk across it and whatever. Going up and being on the top, we can hear twigs snapping, almost alternating from left to right. We lay down and stargaze, but the clouds are thicker now. It was miserably hot, and we can hear voices at the same time. My husband kept checking for people. He never saw anyone. We see a flashlight, but we never see anyone attached to it. And then we hear a bird call. It wasn't like a real bird noise at all. It was like someone making bird calls, rhythmic and not natural. I'm convinced now that we're not alone, and hadn't been alone at all during this. And to say this is a lot because I'm not easily spooked. I asked to leave as soon as they're done. They then tell me that they're ready to go right then and there, and that scared me. It showed that I wasn't imagining all of this and they're just as scared as I am. We began going down the way we came from, and it felt like it was taking so long. We were going steady and quick, and it was downhill, but we were not making any ground, it seems. It's hard to explain, but it was so weird to the point that I said aloud, "This feels much longer than it should be," and everyone agrees with me. I keep looking behind me with the flashlight, and my husband kept looking out to the sides. I kept feeling watched and couldn't figure out where the footsteps were coming from. It sounded as though they're coming from all directions. I would turn my head in the direction of a sound and not see anything. When my husband was walking, he kept saying he was catching eyes in the flashlight. Usually you catch a raccoon's eyes spying on you. But he was afraid maybe it's a bigger animal like a bear or something. And even weirder is that he never seemed to catch contact with it truly when his flashlight went over it. By now, we're hiking down a semi-flattish area, compared to the downhill hike we've been doing at least. The log fence or handrail or whatever it's called is on our right side. Now, we're walking in a row, within reaching distance of this barrier, and my husband just stops walking altogether and says, "What's that?" But the question is more of an alert than a question. I move my headlamp in that direction and don't see anything at first. Then, both of his lights catch a shape, and then my headlamp also does the same. I move my headlamp to the center and catch it while my friend simultaneously finds it in her lights as well. All six shine on a kind of reflective grey creature. It's bent in a crouching position, kneeling on its front leg, and it starts turning towards us. It starts to turn slowly, and my mind is racing. It looks like a human, but it's too big. People mistake human shapes for what's actually bears, but this is skinny. It's thin and big, and almost white. It's so light grey. Its skin resembles that of a dolphin. There's a shine to it, and our lights get reflected a little way when they're on it. It gradually comes to a standing position in front of us. Its head is long, and its eyes are in a human position on its face, not on the side like most animals. We can't see other facial features, just big, almost empty holes or pits where its eyes are. It looks directly at us in our lights. The way it stood is almost intimidating, almost like when a snake raises up and flexes their necks in a wild fashion to show how strong and smart they are. It was like it was stepping up for a fight, from crouching, then standing directly in front of us. The arms hung down so low, the hands seemed way too long. Its hands had to be by its knees easily. I guess it stood 9 feet or so, and not that far in front of us. No, it has no hair at all, and its head is large. I couldn't process what I was seeing. I was truly frozen. Then, I just feel my husband hitting me, yelling "run." I start to understand we have to get away from this thing, and it pivots and runs to the right, going backwards on the trail so it could get around the barrier and onto the trail behind us. We take off running the rest of the way down the trail, knowing that this thing just took off much faster than us, and after it had crossed from behind the barrier, it would be gaining on us quick. We didn't talk at all because we tried to figure out what was going on and knew it wasn't good to draw attention to us. We kept running as fast as we could, but some areas are steep. It literally never feels as though we're out of sight from this creature. And we made it to the trail beginning with the gravel, and we can hear something to the side crashing down through the forest. We ran until we got to the car, then drove as fast as we could, and as soon as we got to the main road, we're finally out of there. When that thing looked at us, I knew it was smarter and faster than us. I knew that if we didn't react, something terrible would have happened. We made it back to where we're all staying, and all of us took out our phones and wrote a note of what we saw. We haven't spoke about it until after, and we all looked at each other's phones and the stories are all exactly the same. When I was 12, Me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in those woods where we're on the edge of our neighbourhood. We would always play at around 6, but had to be home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those are the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday, we're out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decide to go in the woods deeper. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but I do remember coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I start to head back, I turn my head to look at the same shack one last time, and for a split second, I see someone peeking around the door. Whoever it was quickly turns their head back when they saw me, and I don't pay much attention to it and head back. I'm about halfway through my walk when I hear, "Hey kid, come over here." I look back and see an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing for me to come. I know better, and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait now, come back," and I could also hear the sounds of other footsteps accompanying him after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friend's house, who was wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually, I told my mum what happened too. Our parents called the police to search for the woods, but they never found anything, and our parents never let us play out again after that. Old man living in the shack, you could still be out there. I just hope you get caught and haven't done anything worse. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 80s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer, they'd been out for a few days in the Pikes National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night, my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark, and outside stood a pair of bare pale feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and said, "What's wrong?" My dad said someone was barefoot out there, and they went out and flashed their flashlights for a bit, hollering. My dad swore that he saw the feet and described them in perfect detail. They were old blotchy feet, even having a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked what foot, left or right, and my dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. My dad says why. Tony says he doesn't have time to explain. They all go along with it and pack up and move up to the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine that night. It would have surely killed them. Tony's grandfather had just died a month prior, and one of the last things he said to him was that he would always watch over him. The feet described reminded Tony of his grandfather's very feet. My dad is highly religious too. Supernatural or not, it's terrifying what happened to them. So this happened to me when I was about 7, and I lived in Portland with my grandparents. Now my grandma and I would always watch Lost together every night, and then the news would always come on afterwards. When we saw there was a sniper that was going around our area, in the woods somewhere, and they were looking for him, and lost his location, it blew our minds. I remembered one day at school, the whole school had to go on lockdown, because someone reported seeing him near the school, and so everyone had to go to the hall and wait out the entire situation to clear. I don't think we left school until 7 PM. The police caught him and took him in for questioning. Later on, we found out through the news that He was hiding out in these small woods that are behind our house, literally meters away. Now my grandma and I would go for bike rides and walks most evenings. The only reason we hadn't was because of the shooter. I refused to leave the house for a good week or so because I was scared that he'd still be out there, and I wouldn't let my grandparents leave either because I was so scared something bad would happen to them. To this day, I still have a mini panic attack every time I go near them woods. Just the thought that at some point in time, only meters away, there was a killer waiting in the woods in camouflage terrifies me. It was the end of my freshman year of college, so my friend and I spent a weekend at my family's cabin by ourselves to celebrate. The weekend was fairly uneventful. The most exciting things to happen were burning a pizza on a grill and a chipmunk trying to join me while I was in the outhouse, which was pretty funny. But then, we had to leave. Even though I'd gone to the cabin every summer since I was born, I still didn't know very well how to get from it. We had been using my friend's dad's GPS. It was pretty old and probably hadn't been updated in a while, which is likely why it took us where it did. The route we took was fairly unfamiliar to me, but what do I know? It's a GPS. I trusted it enough to bring us wherever we needed to go. It ended up taking us down a twisted side road that I knew was wrong, but I kept going, thinking that maybe going through the woods would be faster. That's when it told me to take a left. I obeyed, but was extremely confused because it looks to be a dirt road. I slowed down to look at the GPS when my friend lets out a horrid, "Oh my god." I look up and realise we're not on the road at all. We're on someone's driveway. Then I saw the dolls. They were worn by the weather, full of dirt and faded from the sun. The ones I took note of were clowns, and bodiless and beheaded. There were so many, I can't even make out how many there actually are. Every single one's hanging from a tree. My friend and I were both shrieking at this point. Her yelling at me to back up and get out of there, me yelling what the hell over and over again. We safely got back to the main road and followed that until the GPS gave us a different route, which took us home without incident. Although I didn't see the person living in that rundown house, it was one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me. It didn't even feel real when it was happening. It felt like I'd been dropped into the middle of a horror movie about a serial killer with some doll fetish or something. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if the person who lived there actually saw me pulling up. But I try not to let my imagination get the best of me. I hate to think of whoever's responsible for that house, if they still lived there. Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we're fully set up, the sun had set and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We're both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file of a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask or anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now, I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now, an important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory, every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds, Jesus. Just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful of his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard, so they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the 2 of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now, I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight, lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before. This I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now, I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now, I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get off on its two legs, just staring at us. Now, I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half-meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad. I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me, they're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating, and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. Now as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the south. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a team was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but there really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously at around 3 AM in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly, so I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out in the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. There's not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch him for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they've spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tap my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened, and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They're more scared of you than you're of them" crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way, and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still have my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rear view mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride out to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, We finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the two main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again, and he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of two of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the Reverend started, we could see our minds going to chainsaw killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail when it was dark. Now we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep talking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him, like he's looking at me but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, are we armed? And we say, yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit. He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, that's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me. And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's going to be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I should start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, I don't think that's a park ranger. I say, what? You're kidding me? He says, no, just run. And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger. I said, how'd you know? He's just wearing a coat. He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remember turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police are still out there looking for it today.